All right, students, Mr. Odom back again. We're going to continue on with our parade of animals today. And the big thing we're going to talk about today are the chordates. And this is the kind of an introduction into vertebrates. And we're going to lay out what a vertebrate is, what a chordate is, and then show you some of the subphylum of the chordates. So in terms of what a chordate is, okay, there's four major characteristics we have to look at here with chordates. Okay, the first one being the notochord. Then we have the dorsal hollow nerve cord, the pharyngeal slits, and the post-anal tail. Now, in a lot of animals, when we talk about every invertebrate has a certain number of characteristics, some of those characteristics are only found in certain stages of the life cycle of that organism. Okay, chordates are no different. Okay, most chordates at the adult stage, the notochord has changed or disintegrated and it's gone. Okay, you're going to find the notochord of a chordate typically in the embryonic stages. Most chordates are going to have a dorsal hollow nerve cord throughout their entire life. This turns into our spinal cord. Most chordates are going to lose the pharyngeal slits after a certain level of embryonic development. Okay, so we're not going to have these in the adult stage. And then depending on the species, some species have very, very muscular, large post-anal tails. In humans, we have a post-anal tail as well. It's called the coccyx. It's a series of 5 very small bones at the very base of our spinal cord. But it is the remains of what would be a post-anal tail. So looking at some definitions here of what we're talking about. So the notochord, by definition, the long, flexible rod of mesoderm found in chordates. In humans, this little structure that's found, that's very prominent in the embryo, will eventually turn into each of the vertebrae that surrounds your spinal cord. Okay, so this will kind of mutate and change and morph into the vertebrae, the bones of your backbone. The hollow nerve cord, this forms the spinal cord, so the very important spinal cord that runs down the length of your back that all of your ventral nerve systems come off of, and all of your nervous cells come from is your spinal cord. That starts off as the hollow nerve cord. Post-anal tail and the pharyngeal slits. The post-anal tail help provide propulsive forces. Obviously, we don't have this, that doesn't serve a purpose in the human body. The pharyngeal slits, suspension feeding devices in vertebrates, and gas exchange in the hearing and jaws in the vertebrates. So these guys here will eventually change into the jaws and the ears of human races. Okay, some other characteristics, and these will vary based on species, is that members of phylum Chordata are bilateral symmetric. Okay, in other words, there is a complete and right side and left side of the body. If you do a cross section of a chordate, you'll have a perfect right side that matches the perfect left side. There are deuterostome coelomates. Okay, and they do display body segmentation. Okay, the individual systems of a chordate are contained in their own systems, in their own segments inside the body. So speaking of some of these systems here, respiration. So there's got to be gas exchange, just like in plants and things like that. So the chordate takes oxygen and gets carbon dioxide gas exchange through their lungs or their gills. Obviously, fish are going to use gills, so they take in that oxygen that is dissolved in the water. They run those over the very, very fine gills of their respiration system, and they exchange that with carbon dioxide. In humans, every time we inhale, we breathe in oxygen. That oxygen gets exchanged through the alveoli of the lungs, where we pick up the carbon dioxide and then exhale the carbon dioxide from our body. Digestive system. Okay, chordate takes in food through the mouth. So we have what's called a complete digestive system. Food goes in the mouth. It goes through a series of tubes, whether it's the stomach, the intestines, the large intestine, the small intestine, the cloaca, the anus. Some of these guys have a tongue, teeth. Some do not. It has a digestive system with a stomach, the intestines, and then it is complete. So it comes in the mouth. It goes through a series of steps, and every digestive system is going to be a little bit different based on the animal, but then it leaves throughout the anus or the cloaca of the creature. Okay, nervous system, sensory organs. We talked about cephalization and centralization. Okay, all animals are going to have a head region. Okay, and inside of that head region is going to be a brain or some sort of structure that controls the rest of the body. So a chordate has a brain and a nervous system. Most chordates have 2 eyes and at least a minimal system of hearing, as fish do underwater. Okay, many have very excellent hearing. Some chordates are literally blind as a bat, but most have good vision. The chordates have the most developed brains of all of the phyla and complex nervous system. Again, we're getting more complex. So all mammals, all chordates, have a head region and then an area of cephalization or centralization where all of our sensory systems are controlled by one area. We call that the brain. Reproduction, when you look at reproduction, most of these guys can reproduce sexually whether through internal fertilization or external. Humans, you're going to use internal fertilization. Fish will use external, with the female fish will lay eggs in the bottom of the pond or stream or whatever they're living in, and the male will come over the top and spray all the eggs with sperm. Some of these guys will use asexual reproduction, but that's very, very rare in chordates. Okay, we have evolved past the asexual reproductive systems here, and everything has to be done with a male and a female of the species. All right, so we're going to look at some of the subphylums, and we'll go pretty quickly here. There's 3 main subphylums of chordates. We have what are called the tunicates. Okay, we have the lancelets, and then we have the vertebrates. All right. Now, remember, all of these guys at some point are going to have a notochord, a dorsal nerve cord, pharyngeal slits, and a post-anal tail. When you look at the tunicates, these guys end up looking like coral. So you would think they don't belong here. But again, at some point in their life cycle, they had those 4 basic characteristics. The lancelets, same thing. At some point in their life cycle, they had these 4 characteristics. And then you get to the vertebrates. Okay, these are going to be the animals that you're used to seeing that you would think have a backbone. All right, so the tunicates, okay, the phylum Urochordata, okay. They're commonly known as the sea squirts, live in marine ocean habitats. They're filter feeders, much like coral are, much like some of the structures that we saw before where they have to create a water current to filter water through them. They're sessile, so at some point they have to have some mobility in their larval stage, and they're asexual reproducers. All right, so these guys are very, very similar to the cnidarians that we kind of talked about, the sponges that we talked about, the sea tunnels and things like that. Okay, so we've seen this structure before, but notice we've got a little bit of a digestive system there to help digest food and make it more efficient. All right. Oh, where did that go, you sucker? Okay, the lancelets. Okay. These guys are kind of rare. They're found in sandy bottoms near shores. These guys are going to be marine organisms found on beaches. They're going to be filter feeders, feeding off of plankton, protists. So you see the tentacle here. They're going to reach out and kind of filter feed through the organisms in that kind of swim by it. These guys are sexual reproducers through external fertilization. So the female is going to lay eggs, and the male is going to spray the eggs with the sperm over the top. So almost looks like a fillet of fish here. But again, you've got pharyngeal slits, you've got the dorsal hollow nerve cord, you've got the notochord, you have a tail. You have all four characteristics of what makes a chordate: notochord, nerve cord, pharyngeal slits, and the tail. So this makes it a chordate, although it's a very, very different looking chordate. And then you get to the vertebrates, and I'll go through this pretty quickly because we're going to spend more time a little bit later on talking about each one of these guys. Class Agnatha. These are jawless fish. Okay, so this is the head region of an Agnatha. Basically, all it is a big, giant, long tube. It's got a fin at the very back of it, and these guys are going to basically kind of be scavengers and suction feeders off of dead organisms. Class Chondriichthyes. These are your cartilaginous fish. Sharks. These guys have a cartilage skeleton rather than a bone, and having jaw, paired fins, and a two-chambered heart. Two chambers is a unique characteristic to certain animals. So mainly when you think of these organisms, they're saltwater, they're marine organisms, but they can live in some freshwater. Bull sharks, for instance, can swim in the Mississippi River. They are parasitic. They are one of the great predators of the deep. Swimming is their primary form of movement, and these guys are external fertilizers. Okay, so these are your cartilaginous fish. When you go fishing at Lake Tetherville, you are fishing for class Osteichthyes. These are your bony fish. Okay, the skeleton of a bony fish has simply filled in with bone cells and very little cartilage. We know they can live in salt and freshwater organisms, feeding off of small organisms. These guys are predators. Okay, they're living off. They have to eat other organisms. We know they swim through the water, and again, these guys are going to reproduce through external fertilization. Then we get to the amphibians. Now we're going to make a little bit of a change here. Now we're going to be most amphibians are going to be land-living structures. But they have to live in moist environments. Okay, they haven't quite made the evolutionary jump to living in dry environments, so they're the next step up from the fish. So they have to live in moist environments because their skin needs to remain moist, or they'll dry out and die. Again, they're heterotrophs. They're feeding off of much smaller animals, insects, algae. You guys have all seen videos of the tongue of an amphibian, squirting out there and snatching flies and insects and so on and so forth. Very unique structures on their feet. They have little suckers, allows them to swim, allows them to kind of grasp onto very unique structures to hold on to. External fertilizers. So the female of the species lays eggs. The male has to come along and spray it with sperm. And they have to live in moist environments because they have to have tadpoles as part of their reproductive system. Now, once we get to the reptiles, now we've made the complete version onto land. Okay, these guys can live in almost any environment where it's not cold for too long. These guys are cold-blooded ectotherms. If they get too cold, they will freeze to death. All right, so they've got to live in somewhat warm environments where there's going to be seasonal environments as well. Snakes with scales and ribs, these guys are going to be internal fertilizers. Okay, this is one of the first animals that are going to have internal fertilization. So the male has to find the female, and there has to be some sort of copulation. The birds, class Aves. Okay, huge diversity here in the birds. Different types of brains, different types of colors and systems, and some can fly and some can't fly. Carnivores, insects, worms, herbivores of seeds and nuts, fruits. So just huge amounts of diversity here. We've got wings, we've got webbed toes, we've got flippers for swimming. Most of these guys are going to be bipedal, which means they've got only two legs. Internal fertilization, and these guys have lungs. They're very, very advanced lungs. Allows them to fly great distances. And then we get to us, the mammals. Anything with hair or fur, anything that produces milk is going to be a mammal. Found almost everywhere on the planet. We can be carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, which means we can eat pretty much anything we want. Movement, we can be tetrapodal on 4 feet.
or bipodal on 2 feet. We can have fins, we can have tails, we can walk upright on legs. We're internal sexual reproducers, and we use lungs. All right, so I know I go through this pretty quickly, but I'm going to post the text for chapter 30 and have you guys do some questions out of chapter 30, section 1. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, hopefully at our Zoom meeting.